half girl, half god. Oh, heroine! You're listening to Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast about Percy Jackson and the whole wide rest of the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And I'm Clara. And today,
Ranking Rick Riordan presents Ranking Rick Riordan Presents.
This episode, we present Aru Shah and the Song of Death.
Ranking Rick Riordan is available on youtube.com/DoingOK and podcast services around the world. Let's get into it.
Woohoo! As the video viewers might notice, there's no video this time. I do apologize for that because I want video to be the norm going forward. But I'm not feeling my best today, so I didn't really want to be on camera. But I wanted to make sure this happened. So here we are doing this. We're going to do full spoilers from the get-go because this is the second one in the series. So I assume you read it probably. And if people want us to continue doing spoiler-free, let us know. But I think we're just going to do spoiler-free things for the first in a series or like a standalone, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So just spoilers for the first two books. We haven't read beyond that, so obviously no future spoilers. Good?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Well, we were on board, so, you know.
All right. Clara, thoughts on Song of Death?
I really enjoyed it. It was super fun. It was, I'll save some of my other thoughts for later. But it was fun. It was good. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought that Bryn and Aiden were like great additions to the ensemble. I kind of appreciate the fact that Boo wasn't in it as much. That way it gave the new like relationships time to shine.
Yeah.
And it just was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a great follow-up to the first one.
Yeah. I personally like this one better than the first one. Obviously, we'll talk about that more in depth at the end of this when we rank stuff. I had a lot of fun with this one. I think that it has some of my favorite set pieces. I really like the stuff with the fire god Agni.
Yeah.
That was definitely one of my highlights. I love Bryn. Definitely think she's a major standout. Continue to love everybody from before. Aiden is solid. I don't have a
solid wife material.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wifey is probably the funniest thing in this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Aiden, I think, is a good character. It's not like a standout for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they did a great job of giving the new people very distinct things that they like and personalities. I like that they had Aiden and Bryn be friends already.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, I think that they continued the tradition of interesting, complex villains, interesting semi-defeat, semi-win climaxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thought that denouement worked a lot better in this one for me. Maybe because I was prepared for it. But yeah, I really liked how the book ended. I thought that they did a good job of... It's also just I was so into the dynamic of these characters by the end that it felt really nice to have just like a quiet moment with them a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, it's still Aru's book. And I really still think that Aru shined as our like point of view hero. I was a little worried at first. I wasn't 100% feeling that like her character arc from book one was like present as her being like the imaginative driving force.
Mm-hmm.
But it really picked up in especially like the last fourth, but even a bit earlier too. So I really love her and I continue to love her.
I do wish that her being a liar was a little bit more hammered home in this one. I think there were definitely moments of it, and there were moments of the imagination side of it. But I almost wish it was more like the way Minnie being afraid of death and stuff was like kind of a joke, but still core to their personality. Like they could have been like rolling their eyes at the big telltales that Aru's talking about all the time. And I think that would have been a little bit, he doesn't have to be like the core drama this time around, but just still keeping that is part of who she is kind of deal.
Yeah, just a little bit of continuity with that. Although I didn't notice, like, I didn't feel that absence a lot. I thought she was really great, and she still continues to be flawed in a likable way.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask you guys about, because I feel like I read this book in kind of an odd way. And so it felt kind of long to me because I was really slow playing it because I didn't know when we were going to record, and I didn't want it to be, I didn't want to finish too soon to when we were, too far away from when we're actually going to record. So I read it in like very little drips and drops. And so it felt kind of long, but, and it is longer than a lot of the early Rick books.
I read it in 3 sittings.
Yeah.
All of which were about an hour plus. And so for me, it actually didn't feel that long because it just felt very fast paced. Again, the length of the chapters being somewhat short can be a plus and minus there, I think, because like not a lot necessarily. There are a lot of transitionary chapters. Ones that are really just like giving color to, dialogue and humor and movement from one place to another. But even so, I see your point where depending on how you break it up, it can feel like long in you really feel how many set pieces there are versus, oh, it's just so fast paced between them. So yeah, it's not like a complex book to read. So I can see how that's,
I think part of the reason it felt long to me is because I feel like once you get to the fight with Toxica, it almost feels like that's the end of part 1 to me, because it's like the whole book up to that part is building up the relationship between Bryn and Aru, and that's like the core drama. And then once they have that moment after Minnie is taken or whatever, and they kind of make amends at that point, then it feels like, okay, that part of the story is over now. And now so I think like between Toxica and maybe like Agni, it felt like I was still enjoying it, but I was like, where's the character stuff? It felt a little bit more like, okay, we're just doing some set pieces, until it got really into like Aru dealing with the gray area stuff, which is when I got like fully reinvested.
Yeah, that definitely. Yeah, Clara, what were you?
Yeah, no, I read this book in a weird way, but like a sort of opposite way, where I read all of the stuff up through and including Toxica on a flight to Denver, and then pretty much all the rest of it until the denouement on the flight back from Denver. And it felt like really nicely contained. I feel that like part 1, part 2, and it like sort of was just how my flights worked out, but it worked nicely. And it was like, like big page turner. I didn't feel the need to put it down. Helped me on my flight, so shout out for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do nearly as many Rick comparisons, I think, in this one. But one thing I will say is it kind of felt like he combined Sea of Monsters and Titan's Curse into one book, which I'm not complaining about in any way, because I do see the like semi similarities as far as like Sea of Monsters being about like dealing with someone that you don't really know how to deal with, and then also with like the Thalia stuff and Titan's Curse, and also just being like, oh, we're like, I feel like they definitely like grew up the story quicker than Sea of Monsters.
Yeah, I personally don't really see the Sea of Monsters comparison.
Yeah. I mean, it's much better than Sea of Monsters.
I mean, the fact that it doesn't really follow a specific like we meet this like it's I mean, it's like everything. It's an adaptation of an epic, but even so, it didn't feel quite as like paint by numbers.
I just, in terms of like, Dan, I know you liked this one more. I will just say that before we talk about ranking, whatever, however we decide to do that, I did like the first one more. I can totally see why, like, where your issues with the first book, I think, are like solved in this one. Like, it is tight, it's super character driven, and there's a clear logic to everything that happens. I really missed a lot of the more like flowery language. That's and true, just actually. Like sense of things. I think I only highlighted like a couple of passages where I was like, this is a profound new way for me to look at the world. Whereas never. So I think that's a big
missing puzzle piece.
Well, but also like I think that really speaks to like the ability of the series to do all sorts of different things.
Yeah. This one really highlights the thought of whose perspective are we hearing in a story that gets passed down through generations?
Yeah.
Who gets to be the hero? Who gets to be the one justified in their actions? Why don't we consider, the bad guy more? And does it really make sense for them to be the bad guy? Are they only the bad guy because we know more about the protagonist of a tale? And I think that's what, Dan, you were saying more about, like, Aru's interactions with the gray area. And it's really different in this book versus the first one, where it was more like, what's going on with my mom and my dad, and why can't I defeat him? Like, that's a different kind of gray area than what...
Because it's very personal.
Yeah, exactly. This is more nuanced in just a storytelling perspective. It's really more of a adaptation of the idea of history is like written by the victors. It's one of those things, because while we analyze that, especially as we get older in like a lot of social studies and history classes, we don't really think about it in the sense of an epic or a tale, because those are, folklore is that. It's just lore. It's something cultural. But even that has its roots, and we use folktales to teach morality, to, have lessons for small children, and we use that as a cultural touchstone. But it's still, the principles still stand.
Well, and I think that it was a good way of, I feel like one thing that I definitely took away from the first one that very much is highlighted in this one is that one thing that makes Hindu mythology seem to sort of stand out is the idea of, these demons, these creatures and everything, they can be good, they can be bad. There's no like, these are the evil ones or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was a theme that was set up in the first book for sure, and that very much it carries over and feels very clear, like a very understandable theme to then dive into more. And I'm sure it's actually going to be a theme of all 5. Any thoughts, Clara?
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think that it's stuff that we got into a little bit with Heroes of Olympus, and definitely like Trials of Apollo, sort of like the perspective is going to really change how you think of the plot of these stories. But here it's so much more explicit.
Yeah.
And it's not like implicit in the story, where we're sort of asked to think about it. It's like explicitly put, which I think is shows so much about Aru, who loves movies. And so she is able to think about story in a really complex way, even as a young person. And I think that's really cool for her as a narrator too.
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, something I don't think I fully realized with this book until you kind of said how you didn't have those like poignant moments as much, Clara, is that I feel a bit like, especially Song of Death, but it makes me a little worried that basically Aru Shah is skewing a little younger for middle grade than I think what maybe we've gotten used to.
Yeah, specifically from like Trials.
Yeah, especially that. But I just mean, even again, in comparison to End of Time, that I'm wondering, like, is this going to be a book series that is just less challenging with its...
I don't know if I think that's going to be the case. I think book 2 is always going to be kind of a transitionary out of a 5-book series, right? So it's like the first one really has to set the general tone for the whole thing, and I assume it's only gonna get more intense as the books go on and as they get older. I will say I feel like this one is more epic, less fairy tale.
I feel that.
Yeah, which might be why I enjoyed it more and you enjoyed it less. But I think that's definitely there. It feels more like we're going on this like very big journey.
I mean, again, I'm not ready to write it off or anything, or say it's not worth our time or worth reading. I'm invested. Like I'm, all the way through. But it's just one of those things where I kind of hope we get a little bit more of a return to form, a little bit more. Like, I guess again, I said I sped through reading it. I kind of want those moments where I sit back and pause and reread for the sake of like really taking something in. But that's also me as like an adult reader. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that so Dan and I went on Friday to pick up the rest of the series in like paperback for me to have to read, and looking at like the middle grade sections of 2 bookstores. Yes, we had to go to 2 bookstores because a bunch of the copies were sold out. So very good for Roshani Chakshi. Congratulations. Support your local indie bookstore, folks. But yeah, it was one of those things where like seeing what's in the middle grade section is like so diverse.
Yeah.
And there's so many different levels of what you read as a middle grade reader, let alone, I guess, like YA fiction as well. So
yeah, I feel like the lines are blurred on both ends, where some of middle grade is going to skew to pretty young people, and then others are going to like blur that line between YA and middle grade. So it definitely, we'll see where it goes. I am interested. I will say, as much as this book talked about the gray area and stuff, I didn't really think that Serponica, that her version of the story seemed all that different than the original version of the story. Like, I wasn't really on board with her. Like, they didn't really get me to be like, yeah, you're such a great character. I'm like, you still did try to attack this person. I'm like, I don't know.
And that's why Aru was like, I feel for you, but you still did those things, and you can be apologetic for it. But even so, that doesn't make you right. But that doesn't mean that you being like vilified forever is also fair to you.
Right. I think it makes most sense to look at that story like in parallel with Arjuna, like, and the bad things that he did.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he did those bad things and he's hero, and she did bad things and she's villain. It's that like overall characterization that's problematic, rather than looking at the actions, which I think is sort of the takeaway that Aru gets.
And I think Toxica worked really well for that too, as far as like, I understand why you hate the Pandavas. And I am glad that he's gonna be sticking around. I do think it's interesting how much they're having villains stick around between the books.
I appreciate that. I think that makes sense.
Me too.
Because they're not ready, like they're not capable of really taking them out yet.
Yeah.
Couple quick things. So like you said, not nearly as many like nitpicks on my end about this book.
Glory. But
I do have
it will be a shorter podcast.
I do have 2.
Okay, phew. We know you're all right.
Dan, it's still the real Dan here.
One is, I feel like it's left a little strangely vague who it was that was Aru at the beginning of the book, when there's like the fake Aru. I assume it's Serponica, but we never actually see her transform into anyone other than versions of herself, and no one ever actually says it. So I was like, was it Hera? But no one ever says that either.
Yeah, I was having the same thing at the end, because as when Hera, like at the end when they were talking about Hera, it like living with Minnie, it was at that moment that I was like, oh, maybe it was Hera at the beginning, and I realized it was never addressed.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's possible maybe that will be addressed in a future book, and maybe Hera is like a sleeper cell or something, but I doubt it.
Well, also, wasn't the Aru that we saw in the beginning, wasn't she holding the arrow?
I think she took the arrow she took the bow and arrow from Bryn.
Yeah.
It just feels like Hera isn't capable of like fighting against Bryn, unless she like double crosses. But I don't know. I don't remember. Was Serponica Rakshasa? I meant to grab the book for the...
that is the correct
yeah, because they can shapeshift.
Or maybe Rakshasi.
I meant to grab the book for the glossary, but it's in the other room.
The shapeshifter people. Yes. I don't know if they ever explicitly say that. We know that she's the brother of the Demon King, but Demon seems like it could be Asura, or it could be...
Well, I was really happy to see that it's specifically like an Asura or anyone becomes a demon if they embrace like the demonic art and like dark magic. Like you are not a demon based on like your heritage or like your lineage. It is based on whether or not you like look into dark magic.
You embrace your dark side. You become a Sith.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna reference that. Yeah.
Actually, interesting how little Star Wars references she uses.
She's more of a fantasy girl.
Much more.
Yeah, she likes Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Oh, we can all relate to that.
Dan thought of you immediately.
Well, between the Lord of the Rings party and the little Halloween side story where she's hocus pocus person.
I mean, I love Aru so much. She's living my fantasy life, to be honest.
Yeah, good stuff.
Talking lightning bolt. I mean, that's definitely.
I don't know if it's talking, but
they have like a telepathic connection. So I love those asides. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Like the little personality pings that we get.
Well, you mentioned the lineage thing, and that leads to my second question, which was I thought it was interesting how much they repeatedly made like a big to-do about Bryn being half Asura and having sort of like a chip on her shoulder because of how people treated her differently because of that. And the whole time I was like, is that not true of Aru? I assume that the sleeper is an Asura or something equivalent. So it just felt a little strange. And then when she actually talks about the sleeper with Bryn and Aiden, it feels very strange and very unclear whether they knew that already or not.
I was thinking the same thing. How many people know that the sleeper is her dad? Is it just Minnie and the council?
Nobody comments on it.
Yeah.
And Aru like does bring it up in a way that I thought would lead to a conversation.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the oddest little things where I'm just like, wait, I don't know. I mean, he might not. No, the sleeper might not literally be an Asura. He might be like his own category or something, but it's still a similar idea, right?
Right. And so like either she should say to Bryn, like, I also blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Or she decides not to and is withholding that information and that's sort of like falling back on her fatal flaw of not telling the truth.
Yeah. Just an odd little thing.
Yeah. Given the fact that Bryn is so insecure about how people perceive her as like less than based on based on her bloodline and has to be like reassured several times that Aru isn't pulling a prank, isn't like looking down on her for that. If anything, she's just looking down on her for being like macho. But or I shouldn't say macho. I don't want
full of herself.
Yeah.
The perception of being full of herself.
Yeah. I just want to stay away from that kind of like
gendered.
Yeah, a gendered language, especially given the fact that like Bryn doesn't outright say that she's bi, but she demonstrates attraction to both guys and girls and like says that and is muscular and strong. I just don't want to like associate that with anything and be clear about that. And also, I love that. Like, that's so cool. And I love her cooking. I love Bryn.
I love Bryn. Bryn is an excellent character, and I'm so glad that she complements the dynamic in a good way and isn't just like awkwardly repeating something.
Yeah. And they could have given her like just one or two of the traits, but they gave her so many different ones that I think like really expanded who she was. I mean, one thing I think just on a basic level, the fact that like the strong one is the wind person, that is like not what you normally would do, right?
Right.
That would be like the slight agile person. But the fact that she has the wind, she has the rich family, she has the cooking, and she could have just had the eating and not had the cooking. I think that there's a lot of, and she has the Asura blood, she has the stuff with her mom. She's a really full person.
Yeah. We love Bryn here.
Yeah, we stand Bryn, and I truly believed by the end that they like Bryn entered their sisterhood.
Oh yeah,
like by the end, I was like, Aru, Mitty, and Bryn are sisters. It didn't feel that lingering like, oh, it's like Aru and Minnie and Bryn. It really was just
and Aiden,
Aiden, wifey.
Well, but like Bryn and Aiden, it could have still been because they had such a helpful like 2 and 2, 2 and 2, and it was so nice that they didn't have that anymore by the end. It was sort of 3 and 1. Poor Aiden, but also
But even the fact that like Minnie and Aiden had a chance to have their own relationship as well, the way they related to each other, also on a like hypochondriac
science is probably the nicer way of putting it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think having Minnie be gone for a little while was probably a very smart choice as far as making them all mesh.
Yeah.
Very smart. In addition to getting Boo out of the way. I make myself sound as though I hate Boo, and I really don't. But thank God he wasn't in this book.
They didn't need the mentor there.
That's the thing is, I like Boo as almost a Chiron. I don't need him to be a Grover. You know what I mean? Like it's.
Well, that was the thing where even in End of Time, where like he wasn't interacting with them as much during the fight scenes either. Like he had his little like button end, you know, like the beginning and the end for certain fights. So we'll see what he does in the other books. But I think she's doing a good job handling.
Yeah. Well, and they also, I mean, part of the reason this book worked for me is that they strayed so far away from the things that I was confused about. Like being Boo, who's just in a cage the whole time, or the mom who's just like, I won't talk about anything. Goodbye, daughter.
I won't lie, that was really frustrating, but whatever.
Remember when I was like, I'm sure I'll love the mom eventually? Not yet. I'm still waiting. It feels inevitable.
Take Aru to Paris at least. Like,
you know what? That flight's pretty long. I wonder if they have any time to talk during it. They could just they could write on the notes app back and forth.
I don't know. Aru really likes movies.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure she's just going to binge the Lord of the Rings series.
Good for her, living her best life. But like...
And that's where I'm going to end part 1. Part 2 will be out next week. And may the gods be ever in your favor.